Good afternoon, everybody. It's Monday, January 22nd, and this is the meeting of Moscow's Administrative Committee. To my right, Ann Zabala. To my left is Brandy Sullivan. And representing the city and city supervisors is Jen Piffner. Before we get rolling, we have one additional item we're adding to the schedule today, and that's a report on the Library Public Art. So with that, move on to item number 1, which is the approval of the Administrative Committee meetings from January the 8th.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes from January 8th.
Looked good to me, too.
All right. I'll second, or maybe you did.
So they're good to go.
Okay.
Approved nonetheless. Item number 2 is the Paradise Creek Floodplain Study project with our very own Bill Belknap.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Okay, so I have a little bit of a presentation to cover. Splendid. Get a little bit of background on this topic. So, speaking from the Urban Renewal Agency's side, a developer recently entered into a contract to purchase 3 properties located on the Troy Highway. So, located just east of the South Couplet. Those 2 properties are addressed as 213 and 225 Spotswood and 222 Troy Road. The individual purchasing those properties approached the agency with a request to sponsor them to participate in the state of Idaho's Brownfield Assessment Program, which the agency did in the fall of last year. And then through the course of them doing their due diligence on the property, they identified that the property is located within the mapped 100-year floodplain in that vicinity. And as a result, any new structures that we placed on that property would be required to be placed somewhere between 3 and 4 feet above the current property grade. So within the city of Moscow, we kind of go above and beyond the National Flood Insurance Program requirements, and we require new construction be elevated 2 feet above the base flood elevation to try to reduce the likelihood of property damage that may occur from a flooding event. Because this individual property now sits about 2 feet below the current mapped floodplain elevation, that would mean any new structures, the finished first floor of that structure, would be required to be placed about 4 feet above the current property elevation. So the property in question is here. It's kind of a triangular property. There are 3 separate parcels that had those 3 different addresses. So this was the old car wash, and then I think there's an auto detail shop, previous locksmith's shop there, and then a residential property up on the corner of the site. And for those that are around would be familiar with the property as it appears today. So the property is located within that designated floodplain. So this is the old 95, and a lot of the old floodplain maps are fairly dated. So this one doesn't even currently reflect the couplet as it comes and connects up here to Washington Street. It actually shows Main Street continuing on north-south. But you can see that within the floodplain, it goes a fairly large area, and you can see these are the elevations that appear. I think the next one here is kind of off the screen to the south. But it indicates that the flood elevations for the 1% probability event are at 2,572 feet in elevation. And then as you go upstream, this would be the 2573 and 2574 as you continue up Paradise Creek. But you can see that there's a fairly large increase in the horizontal extent of the floodplain in this particular location. And there's a note here on the map noting a concrete plant bridge. And that is a bridge that no longer exists there today, which is kind of part of the conversation. So the current mapped floodplain boundary in that area does appear to be impacted by some outdated model data and 3 bridge crossings that no longer exist, and it does not include the current US 95 bridge that goes through the South Couplet either. In addition, we've had some other changes in the floodplain in that area. In 2012 and 13, the University of Idaho completed the Paradise Creek restoration project that created the open channel north of the U of I Rec Center. And that project, at the end of the construction of that restoration project, they did a remapping of the floodplain, and it substantially reduced the floodplain size downstream of this current location at the US 95 crossing. There are 29 parcels in addition to the 3 that kind of started the discussion that are impacted or located within that current floodplain boundary. 14 of those parcels are located within Legacy Crossing District, which was started off the agency's interest to explore this concept. But there are also, oops, I hit the wrong button, but there are also a number of parcels, now 15, that are outside the district as well, just within the city limits. The lowering or reduction of floodplain, if that ultimately were to occur, could significantly assist in the redevelopment of properties in that area and or reduce the need to carry flood insurance for homes that may be inappropriately mapped in the floodplain area. And that annual flood insurance is based upon your relative elevation to the floodplain elevation in that area, but it can range anywhere from maybe $500 to $600 a year to several thousands of dollars per year, depending upon the property and the situation. Just to show an example, this was the floodplain map here. Here's Main Street again, 95. But this is the portion that was remapped as part of the U of I's daylighting project. So this was the map that existed prior to 2013. And then after the remapping effort, it went to something like this. So it shrunk considerably. For the most part, just top of the channel, top of the bank around the channel. There are a few areas where you see these lighter shaded areas. This is Gormley Park. Those are the 500-year floodplain events, but that's outside the regulatory floodplain from the perspective of elevation of structures. You can see there's a fairly large reduction in the floodplain boundaries between those two maps with the remapping effort. So what we're looking at is this area here just off to the right of the screen. So this was the condition back, I think, about 1975 this map is from. And so you can see that Main 95 went straight through. This is Sweet Avenue here on here to the left of the screen. But there are 3 bridges that don't exist. So this is the infamous concrete plant bridge. So there was a concrete plant that was located here just south of the creek. And then there are 2 separate railroad bridges, and then you reach the old 95 bridge at that, or the current bridge at that time. So this is what that area looks like today. So those prior 2 railroad bridges were located here just to the west of 95, and the concrete plant bridge was located just to the west-hand side of the current bridge crossing of Paradise Creek on US 95 Main. So there's been a fair number of changes that occurred. The old bridge still does exist and still is there present today. So if you look at the floodplain profile, and this is just looking at, this is the bottom of the channel as it moves downstream. So the area we're looking at kind of falls up here. This is the Main Street Bridge, and then the next one is College, and then it continues on down to Deacon and 6th, and then downstream from there. But you can see the top line here is the 500-year flood event, and then the 100-year event is the line just below that. And you can see this dramatic drop that occurs near the concentration of all those bridges that existed back at that time. So just a little closer view. From the 500-year flood elevation, it dropped about 6.5 feet upstream of the concrete plant bridge to the downstream side of the Main Street Bridge. So these are showing the old Main Street Bridge, the 2 railroad crossings, and then this concrete plant bridge. So that's what's currently in the flood insurance study. But you can see a fairly dramatic drop in flood elevations at that time, and this bridge was really contributing a great deal to that profile. So these are the 19 parcels that are impacted, or I should say 29 parcels that are impacted. Again, we had 14. This purple line reflects the Legacy Crossing District boundary. So it kind of goes back here around down to the Steiner-White intersection and then comes back up the Troy Highway. So there are 14 parcels that are located within the boundary. I think 15 that were outside the Legacy Crossing boundary that were impacted by the floodplain. So when we identified this, it was brought to the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency Board to consider funding a study to assess whether the current map floodplain was correct and accurate based upon the mapping data that it appeared to be based upon. And it was broken out in 3 different phases. Phase 1 was just taking the old model, and FEMA's model was about 2 generations ago that it currently exists in, bring it up and import it into the new modeling software platform, remove the bridges that no longer exist, and then add the 95 bridge back in based on construction documents for the new bridge, and just do kind of an in-office assessment to see whether we would expect to see significant reductions if they were to go and if we were to pursue a letter of map revision, which is the process by which you submit data and information to FEMA and request that they modify the designated floodplain map. Phase 2, if Phase 1 indicated substantial reductions in flood elevations, then Phase 2 would move on to the actual field survey. So before you could do any type of remapping, you would have to go out and resurvey all of the cross sections. So every so far up the floodplain, there are surveyed cross sections that establish kind of the topographic profile and the cross section for the creek. And you would need to do a full field survey of all those cross sections and then a more detailed modeling analysis. And then phase 3 would be any assistance that they would provide us in processing the letter map revision or responding to a request from FEMA as they reviewed that request. And so we reached out to Alta Science and Engineering, which was previously Terragraphics here in town. They've done a number of flood studies for us in the past, and began that discussion and that process. The phase work has been completed, so the agency did engage Alta to do the phase 1 analysis to make a determination whether it was worth pursuing into phase 2. And the initial results did indicate that there were some fairly large flood elevation reductions, but it may be somewhat limited in extent. And in looking at the model, Alta felt that much of the model data was kind of somewhat inaccurate. They were having difficulty correlating stationing in the model to actually physical places on the ground. And so they did caution that because of the age of the model and because of the I guess, somewhat questionable foundation of the model, they really didn't want to provide any definitive outcomes. But they were confident that there would be some reductions, but the extent of those would be determined. They really needed to move on to the phase 2 to understand that. So those inconsistencies in the cross-section data and the age of that really made it difficult for them to fully predict what the floodplain could look like with the remodeling effort. And there's a copy of the memo that was included in your packet for today. Yes?
How old is very old? What are we talking about?
Well, the initial models formed in the late 60s. Back at the time that they were first mapping floodplains within really across the country with the creation of the National Flood Insurance Program. So the first map, I think, was in 1970. So if you look just to explain this table, this was kind of their initial output of the modeling. So each of these numbers, the 105, 104, 105, is a station number as you move upstream up the creek. And you have the flow. So this is the 100-year flow events, 1,070 cubic feet per second, and the water surface elevation, the flow area, and the top width of the floodplain. And you'll see for each station there are 2 runs noted here. There's the effective model, the effective map, and then this is the updated model when they took those bridge structures out and then put the 95 bridge in. So at station 104, it had a floodplain width of about 795 feet and an elevation of 2570.6. And by removing those structures and putting the 95 in, the floodplain width went from 795 feet to 28.6 feet. So there's a reduction here of 767 feet in the actual floodplain width. And then the predicted flood elevation went from the 70.6 to 69. So there's a 1.6 foot drop in actual predicted flood elevations. As you move up to the next station here, the floodplain width previously was 737 feet, and their updated run indicated that it would be 402 feet in width. So we had a reduction of 335 feet in the width of the floodplain and 0.7 feet in the height of the flooding elevations. What they had some difficulty with is actually establishing these cross sections on the ground in a physical location along the creek, and that's where they kind of had a difficult time showing a map and demonstrating what these flood elevation changes would mean to the horizontal extent of the floodplain. But just for a point of reference, so as we looked here at this station, the floodplain width was 795 feet and was potentially going to 28.6. So this purple line represents 795 feet in width, so it's really the first point upstream of the concrete plant bridge, where the floodplain reached 795 feet in width. And then this little green line is approximate what that 28.6 feet in width would look like. Again, moving upstream then to the next section, this is that next distance as you look at the table, so that's the next point where it would be 737 feet in width. And again, it was indicating going down to 402, which is about what this green line represents. So just to kind of give a relative order of magnitude, not necessarily where the boundary would fall, but kind of the size of the scale of reductions that they were predicting based on the phase 1 analysis. And then these are the resulting profiles. This is the current effective 100-year flood elevation, and the top one is the current flood elevation, and the bottom one is what their modeling effort appeared to indicate it would look like. So in an area approximately 210 feet upstream of the prior concrete bridge. We saw anywhere between a 2.5-foot reduction to about 4 inches by the time you got 200 feet up. And really, a lot of that's going to be dependent upon the topography as it exists today. There have been a lot of activities that have happened since that time period to today near a channel that could impact that. So to really understand it, they felt they needed to do the full survey. And these are just the 500-year elevations going from about 3 feet at the bridge to about 5 inches by the time you got to the Steiner-White intersection up on Highway 8. So as discussed with the agency board, the Phase 1 results did indicate there'd likely be some benefit from remapping of that area, but it would be difficult to determine until you actually did the field survey work of Phase 2 to understand the full scope of what benefits could be received. There is significant uncertainty in the Phase 1 analysis due both to inconsistencies in the model as well as by adding the 95 Street and Bridge just based on construction documents. They did an initial run without adding the 95 bridge, so they just eliminated the 3 bridges that no longer exist. And as you moved upstream, we were going from 737 to about 400, and in this analysis, it went to 54 feet in width. And then even as you went up to the next station, we saw 85 feet of reduction even further up the stream. So based upon the actual conditions that really need to be entered by survey, you can see some variation that may result there. From the agency's perspective in trying to promote redevelopment of properties within the district, the agency did feel that was something that was necessary and appropriate for it to support and pursue. We have had experiences where we've had buildings in town that had to be elevated because of flood risks. For example, a good example is the University Point building on 6th Street. The reason why that one sits so far up off the street was that was previously in the floodplain. So where Domino's is now located there on 6th Street, just west of the agency property. And that building actually got a variance to only elevate it 1.6 feet above the floodplain elevation rather than the full 2 feet because they were having ADA access and ramp issues getting it to fit on that site. But those are both costly for the development and sometimes long-term can harm the viability of a project and how well it does if it has to be elevated substantially like that away from pedestrians and away from pedestrian access. So the agency did solicit a proposal from Alta for Phase 2 of the work, and that cost estimate came in at $15,891. At our last meeting of the agency, the board did authorize moving forward with Phase 2, but requested staff to bring a request to the city to consider partnership with the agency in funding this study, roughly splitting the cost in half between the city and the agency, so it would be $8,000 for each entity. And within the community development department, we do have $5,000 of planning consultant services that have not been identified for any other use that could be applied to this project. And then I believe Gary provided a memo recommending that the remaining $3,000 could come from the council's legislative reserve fund, should the council desire to do so. So that was the estimate. I think it was in your packet as well. So the action from the committee today is either to recommend approval of contributing $5,000 from the community development department and $3,000 from the non-prioritized projects, or provide staff with further direction. I'd be happy to try to answer any other questions you may have.
Can we go back to the slide of Phase 2, Phase 3?
Yes.
All 3 phases?
I'll ask something while you're contemplating
Yeah.
this slide. I hadn't thought about this earlier. Is there any way to know if any of the adjusted floodplain further upstream that the university did could have been due to the bridge, or is it all due to the stream restoration?
So their modeling effort ended before those bridge structures.
Right. I'm just curious if that far upstream, any of the remapping could have been a result of the bridges that are now no longer there in this area, or is it all attributable?
It's all attributable to downstream improvements, right? Because previously Paradise Creek went underground at Line and Paradise Street, and that was a substantial flow restriction.
Okay.
So when they added the second channel, they now have both the previous underground channel that's still available and that now one. So it was largely a downstream capacity increase that caused that change.
So I don't know if you remember, but back in the big waters of 95 and 96, the big melt-off. Did any of that lapse over Highway 8? And
I've looked at some old pictures, and I cannot find any locations where it crossed the Troy Highway in that location.
because that was a pretty substantial amount of water moving through there, and I would have thought that if the floodplain was still as indicated, it would have been swamped. Also, as this progresses through, what kind of timeline are we looking at for final FEMA modification of the map?
Well, I'm expecting Phase 2 would probably take about 4 weeks to get through, depending upon weather conditions. We have to do it during, Alta would have to do it during low flow conditions because they have to go in and survey the channel itself. So we have to do it, we can do it before the spring runoff would be ideal. So I'd expect that Phase 2 can be completed in about 4 weeks, and we'd see the results. At that point, the city could decide whether it wishes to sponsor a letter map revision, and once that's submitted to FEMA, they indicate that it's a 3-month review time period for letters of map revision. So it could be, if we move forward now, that by summer we could have a revised floodplain map in the area.
Is there a cost associated with Phase 3?
There would be a cost. There's an application fee. Generally, it's about $3,500, and then we're estimating that there would be some assistance, which I would expect to be probably somewhere in the $1,500, probably from the consultant, should there be any questions that come from FEMA and they need to provide additional information. I wouldn't expect it to be of the scale of Phase 2, but I would expect to be potentially $1,500 to maybe $2,000 at the most.
It's pretty good. I think that the whole thing's a great idea, just to provide some potential redevelopment of the area and assist the current owners in reduction of their flood insurance costs. And really, if the map is outdated, we really do need to go back and study it. And a team approach of the URA and the city together, I think, is a great way to do this. So I'm all in favor of this one.
And I agree. I think if this information is no longer accurate, we should have
Accurate
be
information.
moving forward with updated information. And due to the number of parcels within the URA and outside of the URA, I think it makes sense to share the cost. They're approximately equivalent. So,
Ed?
Where will the roughly $5,000 for Phase 3 come from?
That would be the next stage. I'm anticipating that the agency would fund a portion of that. There may be additional requests for the city participation at that stage as well.
Okay.
Okay, so shall we move it forward with favorable recommendation? Should we go consent agenda?
I would probably recommend this would be better to be regular, and that's really only because 2 of the 3 committee members here also sit on the agency board. I'd like to have a broader view from the full council. I think it would be helpful.
Regular agenda it is. So good stuff. Thanks for the very
Thank you very
complete
much.
briefing, Bill. Good job. Okay, next up is the sanitation strategic plan update starring Tim Davis.
Good afternoon.
Howdy.
Last Wednesday, the 17th of January, we put together a selection committee consisting of Gary Riedner, Jen Piffner, Kyle Steele, Andy Boyd, Gina Taruccio, Steve McGeehan, and myself, and we interviewed Great West Engineering for the response to the RFQ for the comprehensive sanitation master planning process. I think the selection committee, from my view, was very impressed with the team that Great West put together to perform the master plan. Right now, we're in the process of narrowing down the scope of services and negotiating costs for that project, with the hopes of having a contract in front of full council February 5th. We're also assembling a stakeholder committee, which will be very much involved in the process as it moves forward once the contract is finished. Did you have anything to add?
No, this is the one utility that we don't have a comprehensive plan for, which I think has been mentioned before. So we would follow, for instance, a public input process that we've used with our water and sewer plans as well. As that plan's developed, work with the stakeholder group as representatives from the community and get that feedback from the public as well before it moves forward. So,
Who are we looking at as stakeholders?
Right now, I believe they decided on 3 of the folks from the SEC Commission and we're in the process of putting forward names to Gary. And it was my understanding that it was going to have the mayor appoint these board members or the committee members to this board. So we're kind of gathering names and
Just wondering how wide a net we were casting.
I think he wanted 5 to 6 folks from the public, from different customer classes, as well as the folks from the SEC board. And I believe Gina was going to sit on that committee as well. She showed an interest in continuing through with that. So,
Good for Gina.
yeah.
More to come on that.
Cool.
Is, Tim, was Great West the only interested party, or that's just who you?
They were
Selected.
the only firm to submit a proposal.
Okay.
It's good we were impressed then.
Yes. But they did put together a very good proposal.
Where are they from?
They're based out, their main office is based out of Helena, Montana, but the Boise office is the office that submitted the proposal. Travis with Great West, I have worked with Travis in the past when I was over at Whitman County, and then he was previously with CH2M Hill when we did the first rate study, and they've got some background with some of our facility infrastructure type. They did some efficiency reviews and some revenue leakage studies on that first rate study, so he's very familiar with the system here in Moscow.
Sounds like good progress.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, it's moving
Finally
forward quickly.
finish up the last of the groups without a master plan out there. Yes.
I don't have anything.
Okay.
One other thing I might add is the group that they did put together, they have done some material recovery facility feasibility studies, so it's not going to be a complete reinvention of the wheel. There was one other, lost track of it, what it was, but part of the study isn't going to be a complete reinvention of the wheel. Suffice it to say, they've been through it, so they're very familiar.
How does the timing intersect with hearing about, I know you're putting bids out there for possibly going with a different.
Transportation and disposal
Yes,
RFP. Yeah.
right. I mean, will it be important to know if that's going to happen as this design process is going on?
They're going to be working along the same timelines, but I don't think it's going to affect the master plan much, because I'm not aware of too many other ways aside from opening your own landfill in Latah County to get rid of our garbage.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't see that affecting it that much.
Good stuff. Thanks,
All
Tim.
right.
Thank you.
Next up, the Library Public Art Update. Kathleen Burns, speak to us.
Right, yeah,
Fun stuff.
fun stuff. So, there we go. So I put together a short little PowerPoint for you. Melissa Cole was our artist that was selected for this public art project at the library. And I just want to give you an update of what's been going on. The contract was signed. A payment has been made, a portion payment. And then we have her insurance and various project things are going forward. So I wanted to just start showing you a little bit of fabrication. She's met with us, with staff, to look at her design principles and materials that she'll be using. And so we had a meet and greet to get started. There is another contractor that she's utilizing for the sculpture piece with the bee and the flower. And so there's some of those photographs here as well. But she makes like a template and then works off of a template to design the mosaic features that are going to go on the walls. So these are recent photographs that she's sent me. And you can kind of see how she's beginning the mosaic pieces on the left, and then the fabrication in the metal shop of the flower, which is pretty cool. Those are real close-ups. And then this is the next phase, which is really the fun part. We'll be promoting this in the community, that there'll be several public art workshops for the community. The first one will be on March 10th at the library in the children's section, and that'll be from 10 to 2. And so she'll take certain components of this mosaic and have the public integrate into forming part of the mosaics, which is really cool. Yep. And so the first one is March 10th, and then on the 23rd and the 24th, we'll have 2 days worth of workshops at the 1912 Center classroom. So here's another example of a young student working on a template. So she kind of does the drawing, and then people are able to work with the glass pieces and work on the templates. So again, as far as a timeline, the installation is to be up by June 15th, which is our art walk. So we'll expect a ribbon cutting mini ceremony. But I'll keep you appraised, and then we're drafting this flyer to get out in the community and put it on the city's Facebook and the library's Facebook, and how folks can reserve and sign up for the workshops. So be pretty exciting.
What a great idea to get the public involved so they have a sense of ownership and can
Yes.
point, say, mine.
I did this piece, and
Yeah, what a
Yeah.
great idea.
Yep. So the other few things staff has been working on is we'll do a locate to the front area of the library. You notice that they repaired the basement in the library, and so that's done. All that digging's done. So now we'll do a locate for all of the drip irrigation, and if there's any gas lines or electrical lines, or because the flower piece with the bee sculpture is a standalone sculpture that'll be in that area. So we'll want to make sure that when we pour concrete, it's in a good spot. So that work's to be done as well, and so doing pretty good.
Good progress. This
Yeah.
is coming together really quickly.
Well, yeah, it'll be about 6 months, but I'm pretty excited.
Pretty quick.
It's pretty quick, yep. So this is all ages. So little people have to be with an adult, but everybody will find that out. And we're hoping to reach out to the high school because they're right across the street from the 1912. And then we'll be letting college students know in art and architecture to participate as well.
Just keep the elbowing away from people getting in there to do their thing.
Yes. Well, that's her job. But we'll help her, yeah.
Good
Is there a
stuff.
limit to how many, is it just what the space will
I think we're
permit?
looking at like 50, 30 in the library, 30 in the afternoon on the Friday, and then 30 on Saturday. But she's been pretty, accommodating, so it might grow to a larger, but that's what we're going to start with.
I think that the 10th is that Saturday before break, so I just hope that she knows if it's not as, if it turns out it's not as well attended, that she doesn't get discouraged, and I bet those other two would be.
Yeah. So the library's going to really help us with the 10th.
Good.
And it'll be fun.
I'm sure there will be plenty of people who
Yes.
will be here during that time.
So if you come with a son or a daughter, you're only a 1 versus a 2. So that's a good thing. But as we update the flyer, I'll give out flyers to circulate. Okay.
2 good reports. Things are going nicely. Yes. This is the fun part of stuff. So nice.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Yep.
Anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
No. Just a quick note that next Monday is the 5th Monday of the month, and as such, we have no committee meetings and no council meetings. So City Hall's, of course, open, but no meetings for that Monday evening and afternoon. So.
A day off. Great. Okay, we're adjourned.
Right.